Welcome back to the Ascendancy. Last time we defeated Aris on the mainland by sitting behind this river for years while they exhausted over 3 million manpower in an effort to break through, or pony power as it's called in this mod, sorry. I still can't get used to it, but yeah. We're now going to have to cross the straits over to Cloud's Fall and Mount Aris and capitulate them. I did fix my manpower problem though. Last time I was occupying the territory with mountaineer divisions, which is a bad idea. Don't have special units as your occupation division. Either way, we're going to build naval bombers and cross. But while we've been fighting this war, we've also been going on a journey in this book with the guide. For the last video, in the middle of the war, I didn't read out all the events in video, but I think we should go through the adventures of the guide as we try to break into Mount Aris. A fight on 2 continents. We fight in Zebrica. She does her thing in this terrible place, but back in time before it fell. Anyways, let's begin. An unorthodox plan. It had taken several days by hoof for the hills of the Alenian highlands to slowly make way to the marshes of Karpalasut. The journey itself had been rather simple, but by the time that the landscape made way to fetid, stinking pools of stagnant water, every zebra's nerves were beginning to grow thin. It occurs to me, the guide said, ducking underneath a low-hanging branch with undignified grunt, that we have yet to discuss what to do when we actually reach the creature that we have been seeking. What is there to discuss, my lady? A master of silver grunted in response. Simple force of arms will force the creatures into submission, whereupon we may harvest the creature for its tears at our leisure. Well, Elishat began, collecting her thoughts. Poetry always makes me sad. Perhaps we can read the Hydra some sad poetry to make it cry. If this doesn't work, we'll fight. No, I love using poetry to defeat my enemies. A cute poem, or a sad poem in this case, of course. An unforeseen result. Oh, how I compare thee to a fetid breeze. The guide began, orating from the scroll that she held in her hooves. The equines of silver had returned from their expedition into town with a coalition of poems that they claimed, as per the merchants they had purchased from, would charm the hide off even a changeling. Still, the guides couldn't help but feel rather foolish. She was standing knee-deep on the banks of a great pool of stagnant water, proclaiming poetry that wasn't even sad to nothing she could see. She could feel that this was the right place, however they mastered any feelings of embarrassment. Thy breath smells like a protrusent cabbage, the guide continued, and thine visage is compared to a slug of the sea. I don't know if insults are actually going to help, but I guess this strategy has some effectiveness, maybe. Luckily, we made the Hydra laugh, and with the laugh came a single tear. It's stupid and it works. Troubled waters. Is something troubling you, Elishat? The guide asked, her voice low as to not be overheard. The zebra had been uncharacteristically quiet in the handful of weeks it had taken them to reach the shores of Key Lake. At first, the guide had felt almost insulted at getting the cold shoulder and wanted to wait for her companion to make the first move. Now, however, the guide simply wanted her Elishat back. Elishat, for her part, looked surprised at being addressed. Nothing troubles me, my lady guide, she responded. Elishat paused almost a half-second too long, and the guide frowned slightly. The guide trotted forward, unhooking a flask from her belt and silently scooping some water out of the lake. At least she was almost done. 2 down, 1 to go. So we've been sinking a lot of ships, and we're able to now get 40% naval supremacy with our planes up and our navy on strike force, or 39%, so almost 40. So we're slowly getting there. We'll be able to cross the straits soon. They've been building up their army again, which is a miracle, considering they've been on scraping the barrel forever now, and they don't have like any manpower. They've lost 3 million. Well, they've lost like 2.5 million. The other 500,000 comes from the other people. Either way, we should be able to encircle them and cause issues. Trust. The final leg of the expedition had been unbearably silent. They had been marching for days now. The guide could feel herself being pulled forwards, the guidance unusually strong. She marched without end, and the column trudged on faithfully behind. As they marched, the terrain grew harsher. The world was covered in a blanket of snow. Them being up here in these mountains and snowy forests. They marched and eventually they stopped. The place held no tomb, no cairn, no memorial of any kind, but the guide knew that it was here. Silently, she gestured for shovels to sink into the snow, and the assembled zebras began without hesitation. It took precious little time for the bounty that she had been seeking to be unearthed, the husk of the first queen. The guide exclaimed. She strode forward and drew her knife from her back and approached the carcass. It wasn't a moment later that green smoke began to surround her, and at once the host of zebras shifted back into changelings, green blood on white snow. They were all changelings. Not a single zebra remained among them. She felt a pang. How long? She choked out, her voice full of emotion. Since the beginning, Elshat, no, a changeling with her form shifted into its true form. Someone sent us here to make sure you don't cause us any trouble, and yet you did. With a cry of anguish, the guide threw her knife, impacting the forehead of the nearest changeling. She grabbed 2 potions from her belt and threw them before diving into the nearest snowbank. The first exploded, transmuting the flesh of the changelings unfortunate enough to be caught in its blast into crystal. The second fell into another crowd of changelings, simply imploding them in a torrent of alchemical fire. Ignoring the screams around her, the guide charged forward, retrieving her knife and throwing a smokescreen potion into the snow. She grabbed another potion and threw it, finding no satisfaction in the screams of melting changeling flesh. The guide plunged the knife, the tears in her eyes matching those of the changeling in front of her. She screamed as she grabbed the potions at random and flung them into the mist. She screamed as she stabbed the changeling who dared to wear Elshat's face. She made the return trip alone. We obtained the chitin of the first queen. Oh, and Chirruptera breaks free. Well, that doesn't matter. They're occupied. And here we go, a different expedition now. Hopefully this one will not end as poorly, as we're on this small island off of the main continent. A stroke of fortune. It was on the 7th day that the expedition party had its first stroke of fortune. One of the equines of silver had spotted a flask of brilliant emerald green and deep sea blue among the sooty gray that made up the landscape of this part of the Dragon Island. At this point the party was anxious for any lead, as they had yet to see any dragon, large or small, on their trip thus far. Thus, they sailed to the area where the stallion had spotted the flash of color an hour prior. Embers. It had taken the better part of the day before the search party caught up with the elusive prey. It had been a simple matter to track it. The creature had made little effort to conceal its path, and the expert scouts that accompanied her made child's play of the effort. The guide stalked forwards. She kicked a stray pebble on the floor, and the dragon unfurled with a shot, tears in its eyes. Hello? It spoke into the darkness, a waver in its voice. Is anyone there? Please, I need help. The guide strode forward into the light of the flames. Do not be afraid, little one, she bade, acutely aware of the knife concealed beneath her cloak. The dragon's tears continued, unabated, as it struggled to speak. Can you help me? I fell off my mama's back and got hurt, and now I'm lost. I don't know where they went, and it hurts. Yes, little one, the guide spoke, creeping ever closer. I'll find you your mother. Do you promise? The dragon asked, a note of hope coming into its voice. I promise. The guide lied. She put one hoof on the dragon's shoulder, as if to bring it in for a hug, and with one swipe, she brought the knife along the dragon's neck. It was over in moments, and the sobbing subsided. Well, that isn't the most epic slaying of a dragon story. The dragons being able to speak and the dragon being a child really changes the perspective on the entire you must go get a heart of a dragon type of thing. Let's leave. Welcome to the Big Apple. The sprawl of city that lay before her was unlike anything the guide had ever seen before. The port city of Manhattan had been selected as the perfect point of entry into the sprawling equestrian nation. It was a huge metropolitan city, and while the thought of being in such close proximity to avians disgusted her, she could admit that the multiracial makeup of the city would make it easy for a lone zebra to blend in. At the head of the line was a stallion equine, thankfully wearing an easy easygoing smile. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked, his accent strange to the guide's ears. "Name? You may refer to me as the guide." The stallion's smile didn't fade, but it seemed to freeze on his face as he gave her a long, discerning look. "Okay," he said, drawing out the end of the word. "And what brings you to Manhattan today, Miss Guide?" "Business of a sort," she responded, ignoring the look on the stallion's face. "I'm meeting a friend of mine here." "Well, let me be the first to welcome you to our great city," the stallion said, passing her a signed slip of paper. "I hope you enjoy your stay." A plan of action. The other members of the expedition party had gathered here at the behest of their benefactor, a certain terrestrial by the name of Starry Galore. The terrestrial in question sat alone with the guide in a small sitting room at the top floor of the safe house. The two had been deliberating for the better part of an hour, and it seemed as if the terrestrial had finally come to some kind of conclusion. "Bales," Starry said, placing a hoof onto the map sitting on the table in front of them. "It's got the greatest libraries in Equestria, if not the world. If you can't find information on what you're looking for there, then the information just doesn't exist." And now we have a friend on the map, Starry Galore. Okay, so we finally got to that library that they were talking about in the City of Wisdom. The many libraries of Vales had been as useful as Starry Galore had suggested. Pear sprites would be easy to find as they were everywhere in Equus, but it was mentioned that a particularly large concentration of them could be found in the sleepy town of Hollow Shades. The dust of Starfall, on the other hoof, would be harder to gather. The tomes that she had read mentioned the city of Stalliongrad, a city that the guide was not particularly eager to visit. Stalliongrad was a city of the crypto-avian Marxist. Also, visiting Ponyville, I assume not very many avians there. And we're trying to finish up our military branch. We can't really do this branch right now because we're at war with people, and we don't want to start more wars until Aris is gone. I guess we can do one of these focuses to get some buffs against Aris for a year, which it should only take another year, to finish them off. We'll get this to get air mission efficiency so our naval bombers start working amazingly or something. And now we've reached the swamps, and the hayseed swamps to be precise. Though it scarcely received visitors, today an entourage of equines of silver accompanied a terrestrial and an equine of gold as they passed by the village. "The buffagran you seek live nearby," said Starry Galore as the guide examined the quaint houses built upon the swamp. "It is a large creature with a stench so foul that it can knock out a pony if it gets too close. However, its ears are quite sensitive, so most terrestrials simply scream at it until it goes away." The guide eyed him, chuckling. "Screaming? Really?" Starry nodded, his expression completely serious. The guide brought a hoof to her face as she considered a possibility. "If its ears are that sensitive, I might have something that could incapacitate it." The group continued walking for some time, avoiding dirtying their hooves in the swamp when possible. Eventually, they began to hear some gurgling noises behind a sizable boulder in front of them. The guide rose a hoof to halt her companions, then spoke in a hushed but commanding voice. "When I give the signal, close your eyes and cover your ears. After 5 seconds, open them and charge the creature." She slowly walked around the boulder as she spotted it, a giant, many-eyed creature that seemed to be preoccupied with eating moss from a tree. The guide carefully and quickly poured both potions into the empty vial, which began to sizzle. She then tossed it at the buffagran and shouted, "Now!" The concoction smashed against the buffagran, causing the chemicals within to splatter all across it. The sizzling turned into popping, and then after a moment began a cacophony of blinding flashes and deafening bangs. The buffagran brought its hands to its ears to try to halt the offense, but the painful noise was simply too much for it to bear. It toppled over and then was soon assaulted by the equines of silver and their deadly weapons. We've collected quite a lot of, or I guess only 6 of these resources. I don't know what would make anything though. And this looks promising. We're landing, they're reinforcing, but we should get into the port. This is all we needed. As long as they don't convoy raid us too much, we'll be fine. And I doubt they'll convoy raid us a ton because we have naval bombers destroying their submarines. Now we arrive at the center of communism. Free passage through a red land. When the guide had first passed the border separating Equestria and Stalingrad, she had expected to feel something. Stalingrad was the greatest stronghold of crypto-avian Marxism on Equus, if not the world. Zalmar's influence should have been invested heavily here, yet the guide could sense nothing. Perhaps the influence of the great enemy was more subtle than she had anticipated. Or maybe non-existent. Nevertheless, the guide, alongside Starry Galore and the rest of her entourage, had been traveling north along the coastline for about a week. They had been trotting in the direction of a small village that had been mentioned several times in the tomes from Bales. When they finally arrived, they managed to speak to one of the braver ponies residing there, a mare who introduced herself as Salty Breeze. When they had mentioned what they were after, her cheerful expression had grown somber. It was a little over 3 months ago. Some of the local boys were out fishing and they heard a big boom. Something struck a small island nearby, just a few miles off the coast there, and a tidal wave from the impact knocked their skiff over. 2 of them, they didn't make it back, she said. The mare hung her head low, giving a small sigh. The rest of the boys say the island's different now, cursed. They have also seen some strange boats around the area. At this, a look of genuine concern entered the pony's face. If you all are going out there, you must be careful, yes? No telling what might happen. The guide was shocked at the level of compassion that Salty Breeze had shown them. This was some pony who was willingly giving themselves over to the enemy. She shook her head. It wasn't important. They had their destination. It's interesting because you can see through the events that she's slowly kind of realizing that this might all not be very accurate, this crypto-avian Marxism business. Now, as she speaks to these Marxists, which yes, in this mod, they're still called Marxists. I think Marx was some pony. I don't know. I don't question this anymore. Okay. But yeah, she's seeing that they're just kind of like normal, nice people. The Tainted Isle. The island lay completely still. Gone was the song of the crickets that had been ever present on the mainland. The whisper of the wind throughout the trees was absent, replaced only by the gasp of a dying mare. Even the sound of the crashing of the waves grew silent as the party drew their anchors and landed on the island's shores. All that remained was the sound of soft breathing and the beating of the guide's heart. It grew obvious to the guide that a great magical calamity had fallen upon the tiny islet, likely during the starfall that had brought them here. The land itself seemed to take on an alien appearance. The grass lay flat on the ground, each blade seeming to point away from the epicenter of the fall. The trees grew at unusual angles, and the branches forming fractal patterns on the trunks that they sprang from. The guide could see no signs of any wildlife. There were no tracks, no droppings, not even a leaf out of place. Well, this was all suitably ominous, Starry Galore quipped, a smirk on his face. Quiet, the guide snapped. We do not have time for foolishness. The sooner that we get to the dust of Starfall, the sooner we can leave. Ordering 2 of her equines of silver to remain behind to guard the ship, she took the rest of the party towards the center of the island. The closer that the party got to the center, however, the stranger the island seemed to become. The paths they took seemed to wander, and any pony who left the site of the main group often found themselves away from where they thought they were. The grass began to shimmer in the night sky, and the water collecting in the pools took on magical hues, inviting those who looked to peer closer into their depths. Eventually, the guide and her party reached the center of the island. The fallen star lay in a large crater, glowing faintly in the stillness of the night. Starry stepped forward, but the guide lay her hoof across his chest, her eyes widening. And the fallen star? Well, now that is a problem, Starry Galore whispered, staring at the Ursa Major that lay sleeping below. He glanced to the guide. So, what do you think? Do you have any voodoo magic that might take this thing down? What even is that? I don't know. Anyways, they got it, and then they ran away. Now we go to Ponyville. It's a special extra menu for more places here. I'm kind of sad. It doesn't look like we'll be visiting the penguins. Oh well, maybe we'll go there. Who knows, but I don't think so. So this is it, the fall of the Harmonious in Zebrica. The end of Mount Aris. Well, they have medium tanks, but we'll be able to maneuver them, maybe. Interestingly enough, they were swarmed by vendors trying to sell them stuff. I guess it's kind of annoying, but it's the least threatening thing that has happened the entire time. Still an inconvenience, but nothing compared to what they've been through so far. And into the forest. In the end, the guide had decided to enter the forest by herself. The residents of Ponyville, cowards one and all, had very little good to say about the Evertree Forest. It's haunted, one had told her. Nothing kind or good lives there. Everything in the forest can and will try to hurt you, or worse. Needless to say, the guide had not gotten to where she was by listening to scared ponies. Having briefly scouted the outskirts of the forest, she determined that the best course of action would be to just go it alone. The rough, boggy terrain would be hellish on her more heavily armored equines of silver, and she'd be quick enough to get in and out as needed. And it had all gone wrong rather quickly. She watched helplessly as the mixtures pooled on the ground, and the resulting explosion sent her tumbling off a cliff into the river below. Trying desperately to claw to the surface, she was forced to cut the tattered remains of her cloak as it got tangled around her. She surfaced, gasping for breath, and swam to the shore. She lay there panting and felt a shadow looming over her. Glancing up, she saw, was that a zebra? What is this that washed on the shore? The strange zebra said, her voice taking an odd cadence. Someone new or something more? Taking the proffered hoof, the guide followed the zebra to safety. Stranger in a strange land. The strange zebra had introduced herself as Zakora in her own strange way of speaking, and had led the guide to a small hut in the middle of the Everfree forest. It was undoubtedly the home of an alchemist, though the guide couldn't tell if she had been classically trained or had learned on her own. It has been some time, you see, Zakora began, her tone almost uncertain, since I've met someone from the old country. Tell me, stranger, from where do you hail? From what foreign port did you sail? The guide took a moment to parse the words. Carthage, or the Ascendancy now. Strange rumors have come from there, Zakora hummed. Once a kind land, but no longer so fair. Tell me, stranger, be you a refugee? The zebra's eyes grew hard, assessing. If something else, I suggest you flee. The guide shivered. Yes, I'm a refugee, she lied. Carthage, it's no longer what it used to be. The other zebra's eyes softened. I believe that I begin to see, though why have you come to the Everfree? Reagents, she admitted. I'm an alchemist, much like yourself. A bog like this would be perfect for what I'm trying to do. Sap from a tree within a bog in the Everfree. Tree sap now. That puts us at 9 items. And here Mount Aris nears its fall. We enter Starfield. We'll encircle these 2 divisions or push them out. That's fine. And then this mess of a country will be put to rest. Ascendant forces take their capital. We maybe can just try to push to snipe victory points. I don't know how well they're garrisoning things. A dream. The castle of the 2 sisters was surprisingly easy to find. She had relied heavily on the guidance as she made her way from Zakora's hut and managed to avoid getting into too much trouble along the way. She felt the guidance directing her through the ruin and carefully made her way through stately halls, eventually coming upon what appeared to be a sort of throne room. Stained glass littered the floor, and rot had consumed the ceiling some ages past, leaving the stars to shine down on the room. Looking up, she felt the guidance starting to sing as she caught sight of a silhouette among the stars. It was the Tantibus. She realized, as she tried to figure out a way to get to it, the creature took notice of her and jumped down. She felt the world start to shift. She was in Carthage, Hiram's study. Her teacher stands there, his voice booming through the halls. There are 3, those that are pure, those that are foul, and those that were never meant to be. The filthy corrupt the pure and must be cleansed. Those that were never meant to be are of little consequence. When the world turns, the pure will remain. His eyes turn to her, and the scene shifts. 2 hippogriffs hide in the bombed-out ruin of a home, one old and one very young. The old one is comforting the little one. You have to be quiet, she coos, but to the little one sobs. A faceless figure comes around the corner, brandishing a gun. The scene shifts again. A zebra works in a factory. He is tired and has not slept for some time. He needs to give his all for equinity. Any less would be treason. He can't go on. He collapses, and the world is dark. The guy guide stands before a mirror. This is the world that you fight for, the reflection says. The guide feels her mouth move to speak the words. This is your common cause. Is this truly what you desire? A world of purity? What more will it take? How much more are you willing to give? The guide rears back, and with a gasping breath, the guide came to, holding the desired ingredient in her hoof. Yeah, things are coming to a front here. Her story, I don't think, is going to end with her and Mr. Starfather parading off into the sunset, if I had to guess. I don't know, though, of course. Maybe. Also, as we do these missions, we can spend army experience and supplies and such to increase our chances of their success, which is nice. And a letter to the Starfather. Hello, my teacher. Equus has been wonderful so far. For the most part, the ponies here are quite friendly, though they are not without their faults. Were it not for some recent issues in Equestria on top of your commitments back in Colthage, I would suggest purchasing a summer home near Bales. Having spent some time here, I'm fairly certain that a powerful potion could be brewed from the product of a fearsome monster, something mundane, and one other ingredient from the eastern half of Equus. Hopefully this information is of use to you, my teacher. It might be worth writing this down. Yes, I think so. After having spent months on feet in the wilderness, the comfort of public transportation felt like decadence. It did, however, give her quite a bit of time to think. The nightmare from the castle had visited her each night. The horrible images haunting her in the morning offered little relief. She relived that first night in the Dragon Isles, remembering how she felt nothing, as she cut the heart from the child. How had she been so callous? Filling the train slow as they reached their destination was a welcome relief. As the guide stepped out into the warm midday air, she felt the guidance direct her to the town. She saw ponies going about their business, their only cares wrapped up with the confines of their small lives. And then she saw the buffalo. She could hardly believe her eyes, but they were there. Cosmic mistakes, working together with the equines like equals. They were equals, she realized, in every way that mattered. They were people, equine or not, and wasn't that what really mattered? Then the guidance shifted, directing her into the setting sun. Okay, maybe I spoke a little too soon about the setting sun thing. I swear I haven't seen this event before. Requiem. The guidance led her through the countryside for the better part of the day until she came to a lone campfire. By it sat a lone buffalo, staring serenely into the sunset. He was larger than most of his kind, but held himself with gentle air. The guide walked over and sat down next to him. He said nothing, offering only a kind smile as a greeting, and they sat together in silence for a time. What do you do? The guide asked quietly, when the silence became too much to bear. When you've made a mistake. The buffalo chuckled, a warm, sonorous sound. Why? He answered, as if it were the most simple thing in the world. You make it right, of course. What if the mistake is too big to make right? She asked, feeling small. In my experience, very little is too large to be made right given time, diligence, and dedication, he said. Grunting, he rose to his hoofs, and the guide rushed to help him. Follow me, little one. There's something that I like to show you. They walked for a while until they came to a grove. A strange deer-like creature sat by a myriad of beings, great and small. Is that she began. The great seedling? Yes, she's a good friend of mine. The ponies believe that she's a sign of a good harvest. But I see something more. With her, I see the world. A world where all are allowed to be. There is no one pure, no one impure, no mistakes. There are people. The buffalo gave the guide a hard stare. Do you understand? Yes, the guide thought. She was beginning to. And that, I think, ends our affairs in Equus. Now we're caught up to all the stuff I did during the Civil War. Or not the Civil War, the war with Aris, stupid war. And our navy was kind of sunk, unfortunately, and we don't have any supply because they are convoy raiding us, but they are about capitulated. I think if we take this city, they'll capitulate, and they hold on 96% of the way towards capitulation. So very close. And at last the Starfather wins. The equines have been liberated. They will now serve the Starfather proudly. A beautiful achievement, truly ascendant. But that is all for now. We will continue the journey in Griffonia and maybe put boots on Griffonia too, if you know what that means, next time.